The Sudan has always been near and dear to my heart. I was born in November 1955, the same month the South Sudan would begin its tortuously slow path to independence. Later I would go to Sudan as an English teacher. Posted in the very rural northern province, I lived there during the tumultuous times between 1980 and 1984 as the country wrestled with military dictatorship, economic difficulties, environmental problems, and Islamist extremism. While there, I experienced the extraordinary hospitality of the Sudanese people. I did research on Sudanese subnational government for my doctorate at the University of Reading in England. After returning to America and meeting my wife, we would both get involved in rebuilding South Sudan as part of a program of the Episcopal Church. I became a very active member of the Sudan Studies Association as a board member, conference organizer, vice president, president, and executive director. Hence, throughout my entire adult life, I have been intimately involved with Sudanese affairs at some level. Meanwhile, millions died amid the conflicts and poverty of Northeast Africa. This video traces Sudan's history, particularly emphasizing the last 35 years. Going back to the earliest of ancient times, Sudanese history has been essentially that of military rule. The pharaohs used Sudan for its many resources. During Egypt's long decline, a group from the south, the Kushites, took over the empire as its 25th dynasty. Later, Egypt was ruled by Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Macedonians, Romans, Arabs, and Turks. During what Westerners would call medieval times, Northern Sudan enjoyed relative isolation and a flourishing culture combining African and early Christian elements. In the 1820s, Turkish ruler of Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha, conquered Sudan to procure gold, slaves, and soldiers. This brought about the end of the Fund Sultanate along the Nile in central Sudan. During the First World War, the First Sultanate in western Sudan was deposed. Earlier, at the end of the 1800s, indigenous forces led by Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi were able to overthrow Turkish rule. He only ruled for a short period, and his successor Abdullah needed to continue to rule by military means. This period, known as the Mahdiya, only lasts a decade and a half. Dominating Sudan in the first half of the 20th century, the British used military force to maintain power. Even after independence, when Sudan had no external threats, more periods of military rule followed, due to paralyzing political divisions and insurgencies in South Sudan, Darfur, Kordofan, and the East. Sudan became independent from Anglo-Egyptian rule on the 1st of January 1956. Its first prime minister was Ismail el-Azhari, leader of the Unionists who wanted to join Egypt. He is shown here unfurling the new nation's flag with senior military officers and opposition leader Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi. With the war-ravaged South out of the picture, the remainder of Sudan was almost evenly divided between the Unionists and nationalists wanting a strong independent Sudan. While parliament was deadlocked, the world price of cotton, Sudan's most important export, plummeted. This led the military to intervene in the form of General Ibrahim Aboud, a mere 2 years after independence. Aboud soon discovered that the same forces which polarized civilian society also affected the military. Aboud ruled from 1958 until 1964, when he was overthrown in a popular uprising, one of the few examples in history of civilians overthrowing military rule. Electoral democracy returned. One of the leaders who emerges during this period and will continue to be prominent in Sudanese affairs is Sadiq al-Mahdi, leader of the Ummah Party, the nationalists who particularly wanted to distance themselves from Egypt. But once again, the two forces of unionists and nationalists became deadlocked, to such a degree that at one point there were two governments, one inside of Parliament and one on the front lawn. By 1969, the military again intervened under Jafar Mohammed Nimeri. Nimeri was a political chameleon, first an Arab nationalist, tied closely with Egypt and the Soviet bloc. He quickly became pro-American when Egypt fell out with the Soviet Union. Later he would claim to be Islamist. The primary leader of the Muslim fundamentalists in Sudan was Hassan el-Turabi. He will never lead Sudan, but will be an important influence. On April Fool's Day, 1985, Nimeri will be overthrown, and democracy will return, including a government led by Sadiq al-Mahdi. However, whether under civilians or military officers, war in the south and polarizing disunity in the north will continue. Sudan was Africa's largest country in area, almost a third the size of the United States, or, as I noted in my classes, equal to the United States west of the Great Divide. Its divisive religious and cultural diversity was a construct of first Turkish and then British colonialism. Slave raiders were put into the same country as the areas they had victimized. Attempts to create meaningful provincial, regional, and local governments were frustrated by the manipulation of capital city elites and lack of funds. After a half-century of civil war, the South Sudan became independent. It immediately led to civil war between the ruling Sudan People's Liberation Movement and an alternative SPLM. They are shown on the map in pink and green respectively, and correspond to ethnic lines. The border areas shown crosshatched in blue are under dispute between Sudan and South Sudan. With the independence of South Sudan, most of Sudan's newly discovered oil went to the south. But South Sudan's story is a subject for another time. Sudan is still the second largest country in Africa and 15th in the world. By 1983, political divisions had become so polarized that once again the military stepped in. General Omar Hassan Ahmed al-Bashir seized power and would become Sudan's longest tenured dictator. He came from Shendi in the River Nile state north of Khartoum. This will be significant later. He continued the use of military force to maintain Sudan's unity. However, the South was quickly slipping out of central government control. As the 21st century dawned, it became increasingly evident that the South would break away. This emboldened other areas of the country to rebel. In Sudan's westernmost region of Darfur, a rebellion occurred by Fur, Masalit, and Zagawa ethnic groups, who had formed the Sudan Liberation Movement and the Justice and Equality Movement. Opposing them was the government of Sudan, its armed forces, police, National Intelligence and Security Service, Humanitarian Aid Commission, and allied Janjaweed militias, which were largely Arabs. Following an April 2003 attack on El Fasher Airport, al-Bashir and other high-ranking Sudanese leaders agreed to a counterinsurgency campaign whose core component was attacks on Darfur's civilians. Darfur had long been a neglected region, but indifference now turned to brutality. The plight of Darfur came to the attention of the international community. An investigation by the International Criminal Court found that government forces allegedly committed crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of genocide, followed by systematic acts of pillage on Fur, Masalit, and Zagawa civilians. Charges included murder, the extermination of thousands of civilians, the rape of thousands of women, the forcible transfer of hundreds of thousands of civilians, torture, and the contamination of wells and water pumps. Others, particularly Arabs, were encouraged to settle in areas previously inhabited by the targeted groups. The International Criminal Court issued 2 warrants for the arrest of Bashir. The first, dated the 4th of March 2009, accused him of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The second, dated the 12th of July 2010, added to this the charge of genocide. He would be charged with a total of 5 counts of crimes against humanity, 2 counts of war crimes, and 3 counts of genocide. One person who emerged during this period was Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. He came from River Nile State, the same area as Bashir. He was educated, like Bashir, in Shendi and at the Sudan Military College, only a generation later. He fought in the civil war in the south against the SPLA and later suppressed rebellion in Darfur as commander of the border guard forces. He was promoted through the chain of command, and in February 2018, he became Chief of Staff and Inspector General of Sudan's Armed Forces. Another leader who emerged at this time was Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, a Darfur Arab, known best by his nickname Hamadi. Unlike Burham, who had formal schooling and high-level administrative experience, Daglo has only a 3rd grade education. He was active in Janjaweed operations in Darfur from 2003 until 2015, turning his loyalty to Bashir into considerable personal wealth. His company is involved in transport, mining, and metal industries that cross the border with Chad. For a decade, he actively supported Bashir's goals in Darfur. He would later work to topple Bashir. He is a violent opponent of democracy, often described as a natural-born killer. The unpopularity of Bashir's regime reached a climax in 2019. Throughout the first half of that year, protests occurred on a daily basis. In April, a civilian government was announced, which toppled Bashir's dictatorship. The photo on the right became an iconic image of the spirit of Sudan at this time. When protests continued, the military felt threatened. Hence, on the 3rd of June 2019, Burham shut down the internet to block protests. That same day, massacres in Khartoum saw more than 100 deaths. Hundreds were arrested, beaten, tortured, and/or raped. This was largely the work of the Rapid Support Forces, a militia made up of former Janjaweed under Daglo. By August, Burhan was appointed chair of the Sovereignty Council. The next month, the civilian group, the Forces of Freedom and Change, held indirect political power during what was hoped to be a 39-month transition to democracy. One of the leaders of the Forces for Freedom and Change, Abdullah Hamdok, became prime minister. He comes from South Kordofan, an area of the country that has seen little representation in national leadership. How far Burham and the military would be willing to give civilians power remained a big question. Before the year was out and before democracy could be achieved, a transitional military council was set up under Burham, who grabbed all power. He was supposed to step down in February 2021, but extended his rule an additional 20 months. Meanwhile, Hamdok was sidelined immediately following the formation of the Transitional Military Authority. Burham met with Egypt's military dictator el-Sisi. He would later become a regular visitor to Cairo. Daglo would also meet with el-Sisi. To reinforce his rule, he then visited the United Arab Emirates. He also met with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the 2019 Sochi Arms Conference. Russia was eager to establish close relations with Sudan in order to acquire a base on the Red Sea coast. Burham has been particularly astute at establishing ties across many lines to maintain power. He signed the Abraham Accords, recognizing Israel. He also met with U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo in order to get Sudan off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This worked. This policy has continued ever since. Both Burham and Daglo have met with many leaders on the Arabian Peninsula. This has been particularly important in facilitating the use of the Rapid Support Forces in the war in Yemen, which has been waged by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. For years, Burhan and Daglo cooperated closely. Like Burham, Daglo would even be promoted to general. However, their relationship deteriorated, and by April 2019, civil war erupted between their two forces. Meanwhile, cases against Omar al-Bashir continued. The International Criminal Court launched complaints against member states Jordan and Uganda for non-compliance with their requests to arrest Bashir when he was on their territory to attend international meetings. In November 2019, Abdullah Hamdok and Sadiq Tower stated that Bashir would be transferred to the International Criminal Court after the completion of his corruption and money laundering trial. Bashir would be convicted the next month and sentenced to 2 years in prison. On the 11th of February 2020, the ruling military council agreed to hand him over to the court. However, a trial regarding his role in the coup that brought him to power began on the 21st of July 2020. In October 2020, an International Criminal Court delegation led by Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda went to Sudan to discuss Bashir's indictment. The regime agreed to set up a special court to try him. However, Sudan has been in a state of chaos. In addition to Bashir and other high-ranking officials, a number of others, particularly militia leaders, are also wanted for crimes. They include Sheikh Musa Hilal Abdullah Nassim, Ahmed Mohammed Haroun, and Ali Qusayb. The record of international courts in pursuing, arresting, and trying leaders has been mixed. On one hand, Slobodan Milosevic of Yugoslavia and Charles Taylor of Liberia were brought to justice. Scores of Yugoslav, Rwandan, and other criminals have been tried by international courts. On the other hand, for 20 years, there has been an arrest warrant for Ugandan rebel leader Joseph Kony, who fled from northern Uganda into South Sudan and eventually in the remote area where South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Central African Republic meet. Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army is accused of numerous crimes, including mass murder and the kidnapping of over 30,000 children who were turned into child soldiers. Among a number of other important figures who are unlikely to be brought to justice are Vladimir Putin, Russian president, who is accused of war crimes in Ukraine, and former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who is accused of crimes against humanity. Activists and legal professionals often despair at the slow pace of international justice. However, international courts have been diligently chipping away at the barriers which face them. This painstaking process was boosted when the government of the Philippines arrested its former president, Rodrigo Duterte, on accusations of crimes against humanity during his war against drug traffickers. He was transported to the International Criminal Court in March 2025. We can only hope that a similar process will bring Bashir to The Hague to update the situation in Sudan. Like its southern counterpart, Sudan fell into a morass of civil war between government forces shown in pink and the rapid support forces shown in the blue-green. After advancing on Khartoum in 2024, the rapid support forces were able to occupy much of the economically vital area of central Sudan. However, the tide turned. In 2025, the Sudanese government took the initiative and was able to recapture Wad Medani in the center of Sudan's cotton-producing and major agricultural area. By the 16th of January, it was reported that Burma was able to return to his headquarters in Khartoum. This led the rapid support forces to put increasing pressure on al-Fashir, Darfur's largest city, which had been under siege throughout the conflict, but always remained in government hands. On the 13th of February, the foreign ministers of Sudan and Russia agreed to establish a Russian base near Port Sudan. While fighting raged in al-Fashir, government forces rapidly advanced on the capital. They captured the presidential palace, the Bank of Sudan, and then, on the 26th of March, the airport. By the 1st of April, the entire city was under their control. For 70 years, Sudan has struggled with issues of political participation and governance. The country saw electoral democracy only 18% of this time. On the 1st of January, 2026, Sudan will be independent for 70 years, but there is little to celebrate. The country has experienced military dictatorships and multiple civil wars. Famine has struck areas that have not known hunger since the time of the pharaohs. Economic collapse has been averted only by, first, massive amounts of foreign aid, and then contracts with foreign powers which squandered Sudan's resources. Given Sudan's past record, the possibilities of having a meaningful democracy and equitable development are very slim.